Hey guys, it's Kelsey here from roughandtumblefarmhouse.com, your best friend on the homestead, and today we are talking about how to dehydrate your sourdough starter. So first of all, why would you want to dehydrate your sourdough starter? A couple reasons. First reason is really it's just a good insurance policy to have for your starter, especially if it's a starter that's hard to get again, or if you've made your own starter, which isn't too hard, but it does take a couple of weeks to really get it up and going. And if something happens to your starter, you really don't want to be having to begin again from square one. And that happened to me. I had my starter in the fridge. I don't know why I didn't have it completely covered. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but we had meat thawing in a tray like above that, and it got disheveled, and so stuff got in the starter, and there's no coming back from like raw meat in your sourdough starter. It can take a lot of abuse, but you can kill a sourdough starter or it can get contaminated. So dehydrating your starter is a good way to have an insurance policy, a backup in case something does happen to your starter. Another reason why you might want to dehydrate your sourdough starter is if you just want to take a break. Maybe you have been on the sourdough train since 2020 and you are just sick of that stuff, but you know at some point you want to come back to it. It is a really good way to take an extended break. I will be having a video posted soon about kind of my lazy sourdough method, and you can just have your sourdough chill in the fridge for several months. But if we're talking you want to be done with sourdough for like a good solid year, then dehydrating your starter might be a good choice for you to keep that starter, that same starter you've been using for such a long time, but just let it take a long rest and you can have an extended break from your sourdough. It's also really nice to dehydrate it if you want to send it to somebody in the mail or pass it along. It's way easier to do. I feel like it takes away a little bit of the pressure to send it in a dehydrated form, because if you give someone a live starter, it's like, okay, here's this living, breathing thing you gotta take care of now. Go forth and make sourdough, versus if you give someone a dehydrated starter, they can kind of dip their toes into it when they feel like it. It's not like something they have to take care of right away. They can stick it in their cupboard and just leave it there and not worry about it. Another reason why you might want to be dehydrating sourdough starter is something you can sell or something you can swap with other people. Dehydrated starter goes anywhere from, I've seen it as cheap as $5 for a dehydrated starter up to upwards of $25 for some fancier starters. So that is something maybe you want to do for your little small farmer homestead. If you have a really good sourdough starter, maybe you're known for your sourdough, you can sell it. Please note, if you are going to be selling your sourdough starter, check with the cottage food laws in your state or your country, wherever you're at, to make sure that that's something you can legally do from your own home kitchen. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's talk about how you do this. Now, there are a couple of ways you can dehydrate your starter. There's two processes I'm going to show you here in this video. I really recommend, if you can, using a food dehydrator is the easiest, I think. Or you can also just do the air dry method. So first, let me just show you the air dry method here. So first of all, you want to, with both of these methods actually, the night before you're going to do this, you want to feed your starter, get it nice and active and bubbly. That's what I usually do when I'm going to be doing some sourdough baking or anything with my sourdough starter, as I feed it right before bedtime. And that way when I get up in the morning, it's usually peak active, it's ready to go. So once you have your active, ready to go starter, you're going to take a piece of parchment paper and put it on a cookie sheet. Then use a spatula, get a nice big blob of starter, put it on that parchment paper, and then just spread it out. Really, the thinner the better that you can do, I find. If it gets a little thick in some spots, that's going to dry a little uneven. So try and have it be nice and even and pretty thin. Now stick it somewhere that's going to have good airflow, somewhere it's not really going to be disturbed. You don't want to get like dust and bugs or cats or anything in it. Just somewhere where it's going to be undisturbed and be able to dry really well. If you want to stick a fan on it, you certainly can, but just if you've got like a dusty country house like I do, I just tucked it up somewhere out of the way to let it dry. Now this process takes, for me, doing the air dry method takes a little over 2 days until it's completely dry. So what you'll start to notice after the first day, the edges are going to be kind of crispy looking and dried out, but in the middle it's still going to need a little more time to dry. So once it does look completely dry, you just kind of fold up the edges of the paper, kind of crinkle it, crumple it up, and you should have basically sort of sourdough chips is what it's going to kind of look like. So again, check those thicker areas. If you kind of crack those open and feel they might still be a little bit damp, so it's not a bad idea to still break it up and then let it dry a little bit longer. Now, the method I prefer to use for this is using a food dehydrator. It just goes a lot quicker. My dehydrator came with the sort of like fruit leather insert, and that's what I use for this. If your dehydrator doesn't have that, you can just use a chunk of parchment paper, just cut it to size to fit your food dehydrator. It's the same process as with air drying it. You just want to take your starter that you activated the night before, spread it out nice and thin and even, and then put it in your food dehydrator, and then set it for the lowest setting, the same thing you'd use for herbs typically, and that's, I believe, right around 95 degrees typically on most food dehydrators. If your oven goes that low, you certainly can use your oven. Mine does not go that low. Even on the keep warm setting, the lowest mine goes, I think, is 140. And once you're getting in those temperatures, it's going to kill the active living cultures inside your sourdough, as opposed to kind of putting them in this sort of like state of hibernation basically. So in the food dehydrator, it took mine, let's see, I started it at 11 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 at night, it was completely dry, ready to go. So same thing as if you're gonna do the air dry method, you just kind of fold the edges up to kind of crinkle it, break it into little chips. Again, feel those thicker areas because you're not gonna get a perfectly even spread. Make sure those are totally dry too, and if they are, you're good to go. Now, some folks like to put this in the food processor after. You do not have to. The powder is kind of nice. My food processor is currently out of commission due to one tiny piece of plastic being broken, and it won't work now, which is very frustrating. But you can just use these sourdough kind of dehydrated chips, are gonna work just fine. Now to store it, I put them here in these little kind of storage bags. You can just use a Ziploc bag if you want to. For best results though, for long-term storage, I would recommend putting them in a mason jar with the 2-piece cap, because that's really gonna keep any sort of air out of there, period. Plastic, unfortunately, even plastic bags, they do kind of pull in air from your freezer or from your house eventually, so things do still get kind of stale. So for best results, airtight glass jar and a 2-piece metal cap lid. And this is shelf stable. You can just keep it in your cupboard. You can also keep it in your freezer if you want to have like a little extra level even of protection, but just sticking it on your shelf is totally fine. Okay, so it's a really simple process, as you can see, to dehydrate your sourdough starter, whether you're using the air dry method or you're using a food dehydrator. Now, when it comes time to rehydrate that dehydrated starter, it's a very simple process. I have a video. I will link to that either up here or at the end, or I haven't decided yet. I'll link it somewhere so you can see how that process works. I got some dehydrated starter from my friend Jamie over at Sourdough on the Farm, and I used hers to kind of get my sourdough going again after I had a catastrophe and was too lazy to to do the whole process of starting it from scratch. So check that out to learn how to get your sourdough going again. If you have any questions at all, please make sure you leave them in the comments. Otherwise, we will see you next week for more farming, family food, and fortitude here at our rough and tumble farmhouse.